Around 7,000 foreigners have fled from their homes in the townships around Durban since attacks against them began 3 weeks ago, which has left at least 5 people dead so far. The provincial government says the police will be ready to secure the entire city for workers and commuters today, following running battles between foreigners and locals in the CBD yesterday. South African government are now repatriating their people home. We are joined by Police Minister Nathi Nhleko, who is in our parliamentary studios in Cape Town. Minister, thank you very much for joining us and welcome to Morning Live.
Yeah, good morning, and good morning to your viewers. Thank you.
A lot of people, Minister, say that it seems that the police at this stage are under-resourced to deal with the situation. What is your response to this?
Of course, that's a view that we have also come across, and is quite widespread to some degree. But I think it should also be appreciated that it's a circumstance that is out of the ordinary, in a sense. And it's a circumstance that in itself is just simply not about policing, but it's about the state of development, state of underdevelopment, as well as the backwardness in our society.
Yeah. There's been some calls to perhaps, or a suggestion, to deploy the army to try and alleviate the situation. Are we there yet, or is it something that you believe that the situation doesn't need it?
Look, I really do not believe that we are at that particular stage. I think all energies across South Africa should actually be mobilized towards working on the South African psyche, for an example, so that what we then do is to confront all elements of underdevelopment that we have in our society. For an example, it can't be that it's a correct thing to hate somebody or attack somebody on the basis of origin, for an example. That's what I refer to as a state of underdevelopment in one form or the other. The other element of underdevelopment is that the trends seem to indicate that it's largely people of African origin that are targeted in these particular attacks. It's your Somalis, your Congolese, your Malawians, your Mozambicans, and South Africans as well, and so on. And that takes me back to also what transpired in 2008. In 2008, we had a situation where 62 fatalities that we experienced, out of the 62, 21 were South Africans. In other words, you also had a subjective element in our society that if I look much more darker than you are, then that translated to being a foreigner and so forth. And therefore, people mounted those kinds of attacks and so on. And those are the critical issues that society has got to mobilize itself right across to deal with. Ours as the police is, of course, to react to criminality that gets conducted under the circumstances. And therefore, where necessary, we have got to redeploy and reinforce and look at the best that we can to try and contain the situation and stabilize the situation.
Yeah, I know that you've been the one who's been bandying about the term Afrophobia as opposed to xenophobia. But I suppose a lot of people saying, what difference does it really make? It's still a form of hatred against those that are here within our borders, and whether it's Afrophobia or xenophobia, it's still something that we cannot tolerate in this country.
It shouldn't be. I agree with you. But what I was trying to illustrate is that, of course, the attacks are xenophobic in a sense that it harbors a belief that those that come from outside of South Africa are the ones that we do not want. But the characterization of the actual problem is that you clearly see elements of hatred, elements of hatred and self-hate amongst Africans, because in a sense it's one African hating another African, in a sense, on the basis of where one comes from in the continent or in the region, in Africa and so forth. And I think what becomes important is that on the question of how we characterize the situation, it will always assist us in terms of how do we zoom into a specific problem with a view to stemming the tide.
Yeah, yeah. I know that President Jacob Zuma has taken the situation very seriously. In fact, he's assigned 3 ministers, including yourself, to attend to the situation. What is your mandate? What is it that you are tasked with doing if anybody is found to be imposing violence against any foreigners in South Africa?
Look, firstly, the question of foreigners in South Africa is regulated by law and policy of this country. And therefore, our duty as law enforcement agencies, but also broadly speaking as the security cluster, is to ensure that law is actually enforced around these particular matters. And it is for this reason, for instance, that you have the Department of Home Affairs, the Minister of Home Affairs, the Minister of State Security, the Minister of Police, are being tasked to look at ways and means of how the situation has got to be stabilized. And we have been working with different sectors, for an example, in our society, and also different sort of spheres and tiers of government, to look at ways and means of how to manage the situation. But we're also beginning to look at how do we craft and design long-term kind of interventions so that we do not have recurrence of situations, unfortunate situations of this particular nature.
Yeah.
I think lastly, in relation to this particular point is that government is through the Department of Home Affairs is actually championing the border management agency, precisely because we have got to look at how we manage our borders and how do we firm up interventions in such a manner that we strengthen border management, basically, broadly speaking, and that would see a multidisciplinary kind of approach to issues of border management, in the sense that you'll have the National Defence Force, the South African Police Service, and other agencies also participating in such an approach.
Minister, just before we end the interview, there's been a lot of, and I know it's been to and fro as to what caused these particular attacks on foreigners, and of course it all goes back to some comments that the Zulu King Goodwill Zwelithini made in Pongola last month, that foreigners should leave South Africa. He has since denied that, however, although some people still insisting that this is what spurred it on. Keeping that in mind, but going forward, what is the warning that you put out to people about making comments like this that incite violence, that set off events that we last saw in 2008, where almost 60 foreigners lost their lives? We cannot go into situations like that. What is the warning from the police on this?
Fortunately, I was present when he made comments in relation to the issue of border management and management of foreigners in South Africa. I do not know why the matter was reported in the manner in which it was, precisely because that's what he didn't say. All he pointed out to, because we're in a community outreach program in the northern part of in the far northern part of KZN, and in an area called Opongol. Sorry, something is.
Minister, we can still hear you. I'm not sure if there's anybody.
Sorry, yeah, in an area called Opongolo. He made comments to the effect that our borders are quite porous. People walk in and out of our borders without any particular sort of monitoring. And then secondly, that we also do have quite a lot of illegal immigrants inside the country, and therefore it makes it difficult to trace whereabouts of people and so forth. And therefore made an appeal to government to do something to try and strengthen that particular area of work, and that those that are not legally here should actually be deported, and which is essentially a government policy to deport those of us that are illegally in the country.
All right, let's leave it there. I know that the Minister's earpiece has fallen out, so we'll leave it there. But I do think that the Minister has adequately answered some of the questions that I think a lot of people wanted to hear this morning around the xenophobic, or as it seems the government wants to rather call it Afrophobia attacks that are currently happening right now. That was the Minister talking about that, Nathi Nhleko, the Minister of Police, in our parliamentary studios.